welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our RBT practice question series where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our famous combo pack. When you pass, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. You want to teach your daughter how to call an emergency number in case something happens and she needs to get in touch with someone. What would be the very first step if you wanted to use a chaining procedure? So when we talk about chaining procedures, we're typically talking about steps we're teaching in order to reach what we would consider the final behavior. All right. And so when we take a complex behavior, we break it into steps and we teach. It's a good way to teach kids with and without delays or disabilities. And so when we use a chaining procedure, what do we need to do first? For example, if our daughter, or we want to teach our daughter to call an emergency number, what's the very first thing we need to do in order to teach this chain? A, start with the last step, which is to hit the call button and work backwards. Now, what's the issue with A? Well, we don't even know the steps yet. So before we can decide how we're going to teach those steps, we need to analyze the behavior through a task analysis and create the chain. Because remember, each task chain should be individualized for our learner. If our daughter is 8 years old compared to 3 years old, that task chain might look very different. B, start with the first step, which is to pick up the phone and then reinforce when that step is done independently. Same thing with B as with A, we have to get the steps first. So C, start to identify the steps required to make an emergency phone call, is really where we want to start. We don't know the steps yet. So the task analysis has to come first when you want to use a chaining procedure. And then D, model the phone call for your daughter and have her imitate your behavior. That's also one way to teach, but that's not relevant to chaining or teaching the first step in chaining. D might be more of a prompting procedure. If you're going to use chaining, before we do anything else, we have to analyze the task. And as an RBT, you might often help with these task analyses. So for example, with the emergency number behavior, we might go through the process ourselves of dialing the number, write down the steps, modify it for our daughter, and then we can start to teach backwards, forwards, whatever the case may be. First things first, though, identify the steps required to make that call. Andre is working with his client on functional communication. His client is able to request items using one word, but Andre wants his client to use phrases. If Andre were to start shaping his client's behavior of asking for a cookie, where might Andre start? So we have a shaping behavior. And this one's a little more unusual because the client already has some skill, right? The client can request items using one word. So for example, if we want the client to request cookie, the client might already be able to say cookie. So when you're shaping, where would we want to start? Where do we want to start in the shaping procedure? Because this is not a case where the client has no skill or no verbal behavior or vocal behavior at all. He's already got some of the skill, right? The terminal behavior is using phrases. Remember, a terminal behavior in shaping is the behavior we're trying to achieve, and we're already part of the way there. So where does Andre want to start in this case? A, reinforce any vocal sound made by his client when in the presence of a cookie. A is starting way too far behind. The client can already use words to request items. So reinforcing any vocal sound is not getting us closer to phrases. If anything, we're taking a step backwards by giving a cookie or reinforcing for any sound in general. B, reinforce the client only when the client says the full sentence, I want a cookie, please. B has the opposite problem of A. Now we're jumping too far ahead. Our goal is to use phrases. Using a full sentence is typically going to be more difficult than the phrase. Once we learn the phrase, then maybe we move to full sentence. But we don't want to jump ahead, and we definitely don't want to start with full sentences. C, reinforce the client when the client uses a two-word phrase like cookie, please. Sure, this seems like a great place to start. The client can already use one word, and so shaping, right, we want approximations that are closer. So a two-word phrase is going to be closer than that single word. So a good place to start might be when Andre, or the client, uses the two-word phrase like cookie, please. And then D, reinforce the client. Reinforce the client when the client asks for any item. Well, we're not looking for the client to ask for any item, right? Because we're shaping the behavior of asking for the cookie. So we're trying to be specific here. So D isn't bad, right? If we were just trying to use phrases in general, but we specify asking for a cookie. So the better answer is going to be C because it's more specific and it's a closer approximation to what we are looking for. We're shaping the behavior of asking for a cookie. So we're going to start by reinforcing the client when they use that two-word phrase, cookie, please. You usually call your parents on the way home from work in the evening to catch up once or twice a week. You don't call them in the morning because you know they won't answer the phone in the morning. What is affecting your phone call behavior in the morning? So, behavior question, we want to be very specific and precise with behavior questions. What are we looking at? We're looking at phone call behavior, specifically in the morning. So, what happens? Well, on the way home from work in the evening, we call our parents. Why? Because we can catch up. They pick up the phone, we talk. However, we don't call them in the morning. Why? Because they won't answer the phone. So, in one scenario, right, you're getting reinforced for calling. In the other, you're not. That reinforcement is being withheld. And when we withhold reinforcement, what do we call that? We call that extinction. So, really, this is a good example of differential reinforcement. Your phone call behavior is reinforced in one scenario and it's extinct in another. So, what is affecting the behavior in the morning? A, positive reinforcement. Well, you don't call in the morning, right? So, your behavior is not increasing, not maintaining. Therefore, it can't be reinforced because reinforcement increases or maintains. What about B, extinction? Extinction is what we discussed, right? When you call in the morning, reinforcement's withheld. And withholding reinforcement is called extinction. What about punishment? When you call them in the morning, nothing is added or taken away. They just don't answer the phone. So the consequence isn't the adding or the removal of something, it's the withholding of something, the withholding of the reinforcement of your parents picking up the phone. You've got to be very careful with extinction and punishment. Extinction, we're just withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. With punishment, we're adding or taking away something to decrease behavior. So be very, very careful with extinction versus punishment. In this case, in the evening, the behavior receives reinforcement. In the morning, reinforcement's withheld. So you don't call in the morning because of extinction. A behavior technician notices that their client doesn't have a problem beginning session, but will soon start engaging in escape maintain behavior like putting their head on their desk or asking to use the bathroom repeatedly. If the technician wanted to find out how much time passes after the session starts before the behavior begins, what should they measure? All right, kind of a tricky measurement question. We have a measurement question here. And what are we trying to measure? We're trying to measure how much time. This is a good place to start, right? Because we're not measuring a count. And so, therefore, we can immediately eliminate frequency, right? And rate, because rate and frequency are both require a count. We're looking at time. So we're going to think about latency, inter-response time, duration. Now, what's the difference between duration and then latency and inter-response time? Duration, we're measuring the length of one response, the actual response. Latency and inter-response time, we're measuring time in between. We have to ask ourselves, what are we measuring here? Well, we're measuring how much time passes after session starts before behavior begins. So if this is session starts and then this is behavior begins, we're measuring this. So we're measuring time in between. So we're going to have latency or inter-response time. Okay, see how that works. Now, what's the difference between latency and inter-response time? See the chain we go in? And when you just start out, this is how you should approach it. As you get more fluent, this just becomes second nature and you're going to just go right to the answer. But this is a good way when you chain it like this to really start to cement and remember these ideas. Latency is the time from the SD to the first response. Inter-response time is time in between responses. So if our SD is time is session starting, which is here, and then response one is behavior begins, we're measuring latency, right? Because we're measuring the time in between the SD and the first response. If we were measuring behavior one to behavior two, this would be inter-response time. Okay. And so what we're measuring here is latency, the time in between the SD, which is the session starting, to the first response, which is the behavior. We're measuring latency. A behavior is measured using continuous measurement. Measurement accurately reveals the behavior occurred 55% of the time. The same behavior is measured using partial and then whole interval measurement, which showed the behavior occurred for 30% of the time and 70% of the time, respectively. What can we say for sure about the interval measurements? Challenging question. What do we know about interval measurements versus, let's say, continuous? Well, interval measurements are discontinuous, and discontinuous measurements aren't as accurate as continuous because we aren't continuously recording. We're only getting a sample. And so we know the behavior happened 55% of the time, right? However, our interval measurement showed 30 and 70%. So that's not exactly accurate. One of them is saying less than, one of them is saying more. So what can we say about our measurements? A, they are more accurate than the continuous measurement procedure. Well, no, because the continuous measurement procedure accurately said 55%. Our intervals said 30 and 70. Not as accurate. B, the whole interval measurement is more accurate. Well, we can't say that for sure, right? Because the most accurate is 55, right? And so we can't say it's more accurate. Neither are more or less accurate per se. C, discontinuous measurement, like interval recording, should now be avoided. Well, no, discontinuous measurement has a time and a place, right? Like everything else, it's all specific to behavior and our goals. And then D, interval recording is underestimating and overestimating the behavior. That's what we're looking at here, right? If we have 55, 30 is underestimating while 70 is over. So what we say for sure is that interval recording is underestimating and overestimating the behavior, which we know is a fact about partial and whole interval recording. Thank you so much for watching. Check out btexamreview.com. Please subscribe if you have not already. Check out our other videos. When you pass your RBT exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.